Hello, I'm Anika from Made to Sew and welcome to our Christmas jumper tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to be sharing with you how to embellish a motif or a design onto a jumper or t-shirt of your choice. Now we decided to create a design in the form of a stag's head, as you can see here, and we've got two different sizes of this that you can download from our website, and we'll pop a link to that in the description box below. However, you're welcome to draw out your own design or work with anything that you want. So what are you going to need to complete this? Well, the first thing you're going to need is a sweatshirt or a t-shirt of some description to actually put your design on. You're going to need some coordinating or contrasting fabric for your design and some thread. The other thing that can potentially be useful is some Bonder web, which is a double-sided adhesive that's going to help us to actually iron your motif onto your fabric before we complete the stitch. So let's get started. Start by drawing out the template that you want to use in card or paper because it will be easier to work with. Now, we have, as I mentioned previously, got two different sizes of the stag's head that you can download from our website, and we'll put a link to that in the description box below. Now, I would recommend trying to get hold of something like Bonder web, which is a double-sided adhesive, because it will help to stick this motif onto your jumper or t-shirts prior to having to sew it on, and it will make the whole process much easier. If you're working with a double-sided adhesive, you will need to follow the instructions on your brand of double-sided adhesive. If you're working with Bonder web, which is what I'm using, you can follow the instructions that I'm giving, which again will come with your Bonder web. Now, the Bonder web that I'm using is smooth on one side, rough on the other side. So what you need to do is you need to trace around your template on the smooth side. So I can feel the smooth side here, and I'm simply going to take a pencil and draw all the way around my template. You may want to use weights or something to hold everything in place. Once you've drawn around your template onto the smooth side of your Bonder web or double-sided adhesive, you're going to roughly cut out around the shape. Do not cut on the lines, just simply roughly cut out your shape in the Bonder web. And we're going to iron that onto the wrong side of your fabric. And this is the fabric that you want your motif to be in. You may need to think about the placement if you've got a pattern or the direction. So for example, the pattern that I'm working with here has got these triangles, and I needed to make a decision as to whether I wanted the point of the triangle going down in the navy or going up. I decided to have the point of the triangle going down through the stag's head. And for the first attempt, you're simply going to iron this on with heat. And just make sure it's nicely attached to your fabric. And if you've got a pattern that needs to be symmetrical or placed in a certain way on your motif, the good thing about the Bonder web is that it is see-through, so you should be able to just about see your pattern through it. Once you're happy that you've ironed on your Bonder web onto your piece of fabric, you're then going to need to cut it out around the drawn lines. And you may find that a large pair of scissors and perhaps a small pair of scissors will be good to make sure that this is really accurate. And you're simply just going to work your way around, cutting through the fabric and the Bonder web on the drawn line. And I'm going to let you do that for your motif. Once you've cut around your shape out of your Bonder web or double-sided adhesive, you should be left with this. This is your right side, so this is the fabric, and on the back you've got your Bonder web, and you can just about see the drawn line there that I've cut around. Now for the next stage, you actually need to peel off the next layer of the Bonder web, and this can be a little tricky. Once you've got it started, it will be fine, but it can be a bit tricky to get to begin with. Once you've started pulling the paper of the bond web off, you should be able to continue doing so easily. It just can be a little bit difficult to get started. If you're working with the stag, we recommend that you start on one of the ears, the points of the ears for ease. Now you can keep removing this until it's completely off your motif. And just a thing to add is that the wrong side of the fabric should feel a sort of a little bit plasticky, a little bit sort of tacky, because that's what's going to stick this on to the fabric of your sweatshirt or t-shirt. Once you've been able to peel off the backing paper of your motif, you're then going to need to position it onto your sweatshirt or your t-shirt wherever you want it to sit. And this is really up to you and the design that you're working with. Now, if you're working with the stag's head, I recommend that you try and keep it central. So get a ruler and take measurements either side to try and make sure that you're positioning it centrally on the t-shirt or sweatshirt. You also want to think about how high you want it to be. And again, you can use the ruler to measure the depth at the top and the bottom of your motif. And really try and make sure that it looks good and that you're really happy with it. It's best to do this on a flat surface once you've peeled off the back of your bonder web, so that you can get the positioning right. And then when you're ready and you're happy with it, we're going to iron it on. You want to iron this on with a little bit of steam if you're using a bonder web. Otherwise, I recommend that you check the instructions. A bit of steam or either a damp pressing cloth. And you want to make sure that you follow your instructions for the length of time that it would like you to iron it on for. Once you're happy that you've ironed your motif on, we're going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you how to sew a satin stitch, which is what we used to actually sew the motif onto our fabric. It looks really, really professional and almost like you had it embroidered on. If you don't want to do a satin stitch, and especially if you've used bonder web or something, you actually could leave it like this if you wanted to. Or you could perhaps do a little bit of hand sewing to embellish it. If you want to see a couple of the other stitches that you can do on the sewing machine for appliqué, then follow the link in the description box below to our appliqué tutorial, where we show you how to sew a straight stitch, a zigzag and the satin stitch that we're going to use in this tutorial now in greater detail. Now, to sew the motif onto your top, you're going to want to use a satin stitch. Now, you may find that your sewing machine has got a satin stitch setting, or you may need to use a zigzag stitch, which is what we're going to use, and I'm going to tell you the width and the length that you need to make this stitch now. So what does a satin stitch look like? Well, this is an example of a satin stitch here, and if you would like to watch a more detailed tutorial on this, you can follow the link in the description box below to our appliqué tutorial, where we show you how to do a satin stitch, a zigzag stitch or a standard straight stitch around an appliqué motif. If you haven't got a satin stitch setting on your machine, you're going to need to set your machine for a zigzag. And you're going to need to put your width on approximately 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters. That will depend on how thick your fabric is and how thick the motif is, and therefore how wide you need it to be. I would recommend that you test this with a little sample of your motif and some scrap fabric prior to doing this, just so that you can get the size of the stitch right and that you're comfortable with it. Now, with regard to the length of the zigzag stitch, you're going to want the length to be almost 0. Now, this is where I really recommend that you test it. Test it and start on 0 and gradually turn your length up. You'll get to hopefully about 0.2 millimeters or something like that, and you should find that you want it to be as close together as possible with the sewing machine feeding the fabric through the machine. If you stick on 0, the machine won't feed the fabric through. So you need to gradually move towards 0.5, and hopefully somewhere between 0 and 0.5, you'll find the perfect length. That means your fabric is being moved through the machine, but the stitches are really, really close together, so give a really professional finish. The other reason why I recommend that you test this is to test where the center of where the join, should I say, of the motif and the fabric are, and where that needs to be on the foot of your machine, so that your needle is going from one side to the other with the zigzag evenly. So I've found where mine needs to be, so that I know where that needs to sit for it to be even. And as you can see, the machine is taking my fabric, but it's very slow because it's about 0.2 millimeter length on my machine. And all you need to do is just guide this through the machine slowly. Now, if you're working on a jersey item, you may find that you need to use a ballpoint needle. And I would recommend that you just go straight for this if you're working for a jersey t-shirt. You really don't want your needle to damage your fabric. Now, one thing to point out is we're coming to a corner here. Now, when you come to a corner, sort of the point of the ear here, we need to actually sew further past the corner so that we've sewn right up in that area. We'll then put the needle down and we'll turn the corner. The good thing about the satin stitch though is that you can go back and you can sort of fill in these areas if you need to. So about here, I'll give this a try. Needle down, lift my foot, turn, and hopefully that looks about right. And really sort of, the worst thing that can happen is perhaps you're too near to zero on the length function. If that happens, you'll find that the machine will just build up a large amount of stitching and it won't sew forwards. And it will get to the point where it really can't sew forwards because it's built up such an amount of stitching. That's why I recommend that you test it first so that you get your length and your width and everything correct before going through onto the real thing. And I also would recommend that you do try and keep the sewing slow. I know you'll all be wanting to whiz around this as quickly as possible, but do try and keep it slow because I do believe that the machines find it a little bit easier to make sure that the stitches are neat, close together, and make sure that you are moving ever so slightly so that you don't end up with this big lump of stitching. And you're just going to keep everything flat as you feed it through the machine. Continue stitching a lot around the edge of the motif until you get back to the start. There's no need to actually backstitch, you just need to sew over yourself to secure the stitching. Then you can trim your threads, or you can simply thread them through a needle and then thread the needle to the back of the fabric where you can tie them off. And here we have the finished stag sewn with the satin stitch. One thing to point out is that if you are working with a stretchy jersey, you may find that using a walking foot is very useful. Now, walking foot is an extra foot that you will probably need to purchase for your machine, and one that I would highly recommend. It has feed dogs on the bottom of the foot, as well as the ones that you would have on your sewing machine on the metal plate. And therefore it will provide an even feed. It helps to pull through the fabric through the sewing machine. And it is great with difficult fabrics such as stretch. So I would recommend using it on perhaps your lighter weight t-shirts when you're sewing on your motif. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you're able to create some fantastic tops using your choice of motifs or with our stag. Thanks for watching.